Welcome to Grammar 5Q. In this booklet, we have 3 explanation pages. We will be covering reflexive and intensive pronouns, who versus whom. We're going to review phrases. We're going to talk about phrases in writing, and then we're going to diagram with reflexive and intensive pronouns. So we'll jump right into those. Let's open up the books to the explanation page. So we have reflexive pronouns are objective pronouns that refer back to the subject. So let's look at an example. Emily drove herself to the store. Emily is our subject. She is completing the action of driving, and herself is the thing being driven. Obviously, this is very idiomatic, meaning she is not actually driving herself. It's just an idiom of driving herself in the car. But any way you want to frame it, herself is the direct object of this sentence, and it's referring back to the subject, Emily. She is the one who is completing the driving and receiving the driving. So what we're going to do now is remember that when we have objective pronouns, they can be an IO, a DO, or an OP. But objective pronouns can never be a subject or PN. So in other words, reflexive pronouns are never going to be a subject or a PN, because if it's the subject, it can't reflect back on itself. Instead, it has to be the DO, IO, or OP to be able to reflect back on itself. So then we're going to look at intensive pronouns. And intensive pronouns can also be known as emphatic appositives. And we know what an appositive is. It's a noun or a pronoun or some kind of phrase that refers back to a noun or pronoun. And so in this instance, as it's emphatic, it's emphasizing that noun or pronoun that it precedes. So let's look at an example. Emily drove the queen herself. So herself is emphasizing the queen, and it's referring back to the queen, which is the direct object of this sentence. You'll notice that when it comes to intensive pronouns, there's no new information given. It's never going to be functioning as anything. And in fact, the sentence is going to make sense without that intensive pronoun. So you could say, Emily drove the queen, but you're emphasizing it's the queen by saying the queen herself. So it's just another way to write a sentence to really emphasize what's happening. Whereas when we look at a reflexive pronoun, it's always going to have a function of speech. It's going to be doing something in the sentence. The reflexive and intensive pronouns share the same words. So myself, yourself, herself, himself, itself, ourselves, yourselves, and themselves. They could be a reflexive or intensive pronouns. It just matters what they're doing in the sentence. So now we're going to jump over to a couple of other pronouns we're learning about, who versus whom. And so we're going to look at our explanation and read through that. Who is a subjective pronoun usually found in a question to ask about a person. So let's look at the example. Who delivered the package? Who is completing completing the verb deliver. We just don't know who it is. We're asking about that person, but it's acting as the subject of the sentence. Whereas whom is just the objective form of the exact same pronoun. So here we have an objective pronoun usually found in a question to ask about a person. So to whom was the package delivered? Whom being the object of the preposition and the package being the subject in the sentence. So if you wanted to reframe it to make it a little bit more straightforward, you could say the package was delivered to whom? And here we can get a better grasp on what's going on in the sentence. So let's practice this with a couple other sentences. That top one is, whom would the chef herself give the sample? So let's find our subject, chef, and what is the chef doing? She's giving. She would give. What is she going to give? A sample. That's the direct object. But whom would receive it? To whom would she give? Making whom the indirect object. So now we have one more pronoun left to identify, and it's herself. Herself is obviously not the direct object or indirect object, and it's not an object of a preposition because there is no preposition in this sentence. So this is an intensive pronoun. It's emphasizing the chef, so making it in a positive. So I bracket it in that way. If you ever have issues with whom, Always reframe the question as a statement, and you can have scratch paper available for yourself to do that. Let's look at our second sentence. Who would give herself the first slice of cake? Once again, we're going to find our subject, and in this instance, it's going to be who. And what is who doing? Would give is our verb phrase again. And then what is being given? What is receiving the action? The slice of cake. So slice is our direct object, and who would give to herself the first slice, herself being the indirect object. It's not creating emphasis, it's not in a positive, it's simply stating the indirect object of this sentence. So that's going to be who versus whom, and intensive and reflexive pronouns. So now let's get back into phrases. Once again, we're going to be reviewing phrases from now on because you've learned everything you need to know. So we're going to do that quick review at the beginning of the booklet, starting with the prepositional phrases. My dog ran through the yard. Through the yard, modifying ran, making it an adverbial phrase. My dog with spots ran. With spots is telling me a little bit more about the dog, making it an adjectival phrase. So all prepositional phrases are describing or modifying phrases. Next, we're going to get into our verbals, starting with an infinitive phrase. A dancer had students control their movements. Students control their movements is our infinitive phrase. Notice it's a bare infinitive, but still an infinitive phrase, and it is receiving the action. It's what's being done. So students control their movements is the direct object. The yard to mow soon was overgrown. To mow soon is modifying yard, making an adjectival phrase. I left to find the book. Why did I leave? To find the book, making that infinitive phrase adverbial. So remember, infinitive phrases can act like nouns, adjectives, or adverbs. Next we have participial phrases, starting with present participial phrase. Learning the facts quickly, she excels in math. Learning the facts quickly is modifying she, making it an adjectival phrase. I examined the map marked darkly with pencil. Here we have a past participial phrase, modifying map, making it an adjectival phrase as well. So remember, all participial phrases are describing or modifying phrases, and they're only ever going to modify a noun or pronoun. Now our last verbal is going to be a gerund. My homework was my groups detailing precipitation. My groups detailing precipitation is our gerund phrase, and it is a PN in this sentence. And remember, gerund phrases act like nouns only. And lastly, we covered appositive phrases. Jules, my cat with stripes, is eating. My cat with stripes, remember, is an appositive. It's not functioning as anything. It's just renaming a noun in the sentence, in this instance, the subject. So that's what appositives do. They rename a noun or pronoun. And remember, these phrases can be combined. In this booklet, we're going to continue this type of activity where you identify the part of speech or type of phrase and then circle the function of speech or modified word. So let's look at the first one. We have vegetables. What is going on with vegetables? Let's read the sentence. My weekend chore was to harvest the vegetables. Well, we know that vegetables is a noun. And then what is it doing in this sentence? It could be a DO, a PN, or an IO. Well, let's look at the sentence once more. My weekend chore was to harvest the vegetables. Well, I've got a linking verb as my verb in this subject, but I notice, in this sentence, but I notice that to harvest the vegetables is an infinitive phrase in that sentence, and vegetables is actually receiving the action of being harvested. So vegetables is a direct object of the infinitive phrase. So make sure you're taking your time and identifying how these words are relating to each other, as we've learned throughout this whole series. Now we're going to jump into the last part before diagramming, phrases and writing. At the beginning of the book, I give a short little explanation. As we review phrases, we will also examine how phrases can be used well or poorly while writing. Phrases are best used when it is clear which word they are modifying. So we want to make sure that we are identifying different techniques throughout this booklet to make that clear. So the first page with this type of activity, we have the directions at the top and it gives you a little bit of guidance. So place prepositional phrases as close to the modified noun or verb as possible. So if we look at the first example, we have the pencil writes nicely with a sharp point. Well, our prepositional phrase is with a sharp point, and we can almost certainly know that this is going to be modifying the pencil, the subject of the sentence. So let's read through each of the answer choices and see how we can best place this prepositional phrase. The pencil with a sharp point writes nicely. Well, that sounds pretty good because with a sharp point is modifying pencil and it's right next to it, so that could be a good answer choice. The pencil writes with a sharp point nicely. This is making with a sharp point seem like an adverbial phrase, and I'm not quite sure if that's really what we want the reader to take from this. So let's look at the next one. With a sharp point, the pencil writes nicely. Once again, this is making it an adverbial phrase, but really it's modifying the pencil. The pencil has the sharp point. It's not how it's writing. So the best answer choice is going to be A, because I'm getting that prepositional phrase very close to the modified noun. And so that's what we want you to look at as you go through this booklet. Always, always, always read your directions because we're going to give you more information about the objective of the activities. And now let's round this out with some fun sentence diagramming. So let's get right into it with our subject. The supervisor expected the team itself to improve the results. As always, I like to find my subject and verb of the sentence first. So supervisor is my subject, and the supervisor is completing the action of expecting, making it our main verb. And then what is being expected? The entire phrase, the team itself to improve the results, making this phrase the direct object. And then of course, this is an infinitive phrase, and I have the team completing the action of the infinitive and results receiving the action of the infinitive. Itself is not functioning as anything in this phrase. In fact, it's just an intensive pronoun that is emphasizing the subject of the phrase. So I'm going to bracket it. And now that we have most of the important words identified, I'm going to start diagramming it. So let's make our diagram with a nice long line, and we're going to intersect that. So we have a subject and predicate, and we have a direct object, so I need a nice little short line like that. And then since my direct object is an infinitive phrase, I need to start building that with a good pedestal, and then with our little set of arms. And since I know that it has a subject and a direct object, I need a really long line, so I'm going to add a little to that. And now I can put in my short little line for the direct object, and then I have two modifiers in this phrase, one for the subject and one for the direct object. And then in the sentence itself, I have a modifier for the subject. And now I could start filling it out. So I have my subject supervisor, who's completing the action of expected. And then I can start filling in my direct object, starting with my verbal, to improve. And then the subject of the verbal phrase is team, which is being emphasized by itself. And then I have my direct object of the phrase results. And then I have modifiers coming off of these nouns, the team and the results. And then I have one more modifier coming off of my subject, which is the supervisor. And I have my sentence. And once again, for my direct object, the infinitive phrase, I have a lot of different colors, but the entire phrase is acting as a direct object, so I can notate that that entire thing is working as a unit, as a team, to create my direct object. And that's going to be how I diagram this sentence. If you have any questions about this or anything else pertaining to grammar, please contact the person who grades your grammar at your Gideon Center.